All right. Well, welcome everybody. I just said I feel like it's been forever and then just yesterday that we've seen each other. So this is a great opportunity for us to kind of convene midway through the year. And our time today is designed to provide the board and our community who tunes in with just a really good update of what's happening this year related to our district priorities. So we're gonna pass the clicker around this afternoon. This is a retreat work session format, so if we want to stop and have any discussion, questions. And I also want to make sure that you're all thinking through the lens of what this means then as we look ahead to next year. And so our agenda this afternoon is to go through the update, and then when we talk about recommended priorities for 23-24, this is the board's opportunity to weigh in related to what we've set out for our district priorities. I gave you a hard copy of the updated version. It's also posted on the web. We aren't making a ton of hard copies. If you remember, we changed just slightly, just a little bit of our initiatives language for this year, but most of it remains unchanged from last year. And then we've started to put the metrics in the back of the things that we've presented to you already with our academic achievement update. So you have reports that happen all during the year, and we'll refer to some that maybe are more recent with the updates, but we want to try to always make sure we're looking at the cycle of continuous improvement. What are we doing? What are we getting? What does that tell us for next year? And then the third bullet item on our agenda is then, what does the board want us to be considering in relationship to our priorities for things that we may want to think about during our budget session? We know that there are things you're thinking about, things you want us to be thinking about, anything that we want to tweak. We know that our budgets have been abnormal over the last couple of years because of that infusion of COVID relief dollars. And we have to also be thinking, as those funds sunset here in another couple of years, what does that mean? What do we want to prioritize? What does that look like while we're kind of in process still? So it's a moving picture all the time, but even some different variables that come into play over the last few years. Then we're going to talk just a little bit about board development, and I'm going to ask for your input on a specific area. And this will come through some of what we talk about in a couple of the areas of the update, but also comes through our parent feedback that we got regarding the beginning of the year and some thinking that I'm going to ask the board to do about some of your ideas, knowing that you are our best bridges to our community and some things that have been part of your experiences as parents and staff members in our district. So I want to just use your brain power a little bit this afternoon. We won't make any decisions, of course, but I want you to weigh in and be thinking about it over the next few months in conjunction with some thinking that we're doing as a district. And then we'll adjourn and give you a little bit of time to regroup for our 5:30 regular board meeting. We'll take a break. I think we'll figure that out here along the way, but we'll look after an hour, hour and a half, taking a little break in between times so you can help me remember to stop along the way. All right, so that being said, any comments, questions from the board before we get rolling here with the updates? Okay, then I am going to first give my clicker to Dr. Boyson, and then we'll get from there. And just for context, we have not put in these slides all of the narrative. What we're mainly looking at for our purposes this afternoon are the initiatives and then the updates on those priorities. So we don't have, if you're looking in the hard copy, you're not going to see everything that's in there for our narrative.
All right, good afternoon. I'm here to talk about academic success and all our priorities and initiatives and the progress we've made, and then recommend some for the future. So today, we're going to talk about, it's hard, I try and position myself here. No. Progress indicators. We'll talk about the implementation of MTSS, and that we're in the second year of that implementation. And we'll talk a little bit about PBIS because that's our first year with PBIS. And then expansions to college and career readiness skills, where we're at with that, but then where our future is going with 3 new pathways that we have ready to go, and increased targeted professional development and learning for all employee groups. And the goal this year was to make it visible, and so we're at a point right now where we can show you what we have coming for next year. So academic success and progress updates. We're going to talk about MTSS and PBIS, and we have had monthly You know what? All right. MTSS. We've had quarterly MTSS meetings with our admin, and focused on different topics: decision rules, problem-solving process, and data literacy. And I'll dive a little bit more into that. And then PBIS. We've had monthly meetings with them. So with MTSS and the decision rules, it continues to be a priority. And when they're looking at how they make a decision in their building, that system-wide approach to that. So they're using those decision rules to identify targets and intervention groups and teams within their building, looking at priority areas. Instead of just guessing, they're using data. And we'll talk a little bit about how they've come to using finding that data and some processes that ITS has put together for us, and then the building teams. And then problem-solving process, it falls right into that problem-solving and the importance of establishing and testing a hypothesis prior to developing a plan. Instead of, like I said, instead of just guessing, they're using data. And that data helps the buildings decide the next steps. They implement a plan, they come back, they look at the information, and revise as needed. And so that systematic approach is really helping to support that. And then data literacy is that last area. And again, we're using data in the dashboards, whether it's behavior data, academic data, attendance data, and how they can visualize that. And ITS has put together some great dashboards for us so we can look at that and make decisions when having conversations about students.
I wanted to commend you all because I've been reading the district dialogue a lot, even more now that I don't have a student at school, and every month there's been information about you guys. I thought it was very informative. So parents or other community members aren't aware of that, go back and look at those monthly district dialogues. There's some really good information.
That's why you're reading it. And then the next part is the PBIS and that team training. Again, monthly PBIS training. This is new this year for us, and so every building has a PBIS team, and they attend that monthly training. And we have 2 PBIS coaches, and those coaches are each assigned to a building, and they go out and meet with their buildings to have those discussions and help support that. So through that, they've developed common understanding, and one of the first things they needed to do was to have common language and expectations, and that's at the school-wide level. So the teams are helping to implement that and support. And then SWIS is a program that helps. It's called School-Wide Information System, and it provides data to the teams to make informed decisions on, I might think that I'm having more issues, let's say out in the playground or in the hallway. And when they look at the data in SWIS, they can say, no, it's actually right here. And then they can go back, they can reteach, use that common language and help support or put more manpower during transition time. So again, visualizing the data to see where our areas of concern are and support, and then that positive intervention, that PBIS, is really come back and encouraging kids to do the right thing and using that positive language to support. And you can see the difference in the buildings, and that's after year 1. And so it's very exciting to see where we will be after the end of second year.
Dr. Boyson, can you talk about who might typically be part of a building team?
Yep, so the building team, each team identified a lead for it, and the lead is not the building administrator. It is the person in their building that's engaged and excited about that. It could be a behavior facilitator, it could be a lead teacher. The admin is definitely a part of that, and then the counselor could be involved in that too. So they've invited that core team together to have those conversations around those behaviors and positive supports. And then they plan things. I was talking to a group, they have school-wide positive interventions or parties, if you want to call them that, to celebrate the successes, because they could get a positive note saying, hey, you're doing the right thing. They did a Zoom bingo party, and the principal was the caller on the big screen, so here's their face up there, zooming into everybody's classroom for a school-wide bingo party, and they said, the principal said, she said, I didn't know what the reaction was out there because you're on your screen calling, and they loved it. So just different things like that. Don't take a lot of time. You don't have to pull everybody together, but it's celebrating the expectations. And it's, again, that common language, common expectations, and it holds each other and the students accountable for their behaviors. So that's good stuff.
And I just want to put an update in for the board, just a reminder, and I was just going to look here and make sure I'm not stealing any of Teresa's slides. We had talked about wanting to look more specifically at academic interventions, the things that we're doing. We had that slated for February. We've moved that to March, so that in February we can start looking at some enrollment things with potential program and boundary movement. That's more timely, but we'll get a little deeper into those intervention pieces too, because that was something you had asked for last year.
We will. We'll talk about interventions, and we'll talk about the assessments. And I'll touch a little bit about assessments on one of these next slides, but it'll give you kind of that insight of what's to come in March. The second area was college and career readiness and new pathways. And so we're excited to announce that we're going to have 3 new pathways next year. So students are registering for these in high school next week, I think, is when they start registration, or the week after. First one is the LPN pathway. And so that LPN pathway is in partnership with Southeast Tech, and students, juniors currently, because of that dual enrollment rule, that juniors will start with their allied health certificate. And they will start as a junior in their spring semester. They can take courses in the summer, go into their senior year, and then in the spring of their senior year, they will start on their LPN, and that's 11 credits. So that could be full-time dual enrollment with us and STC, and they would graduate with their LPN the winter after graduation from high school. And so that's very exciting. Worked really hard on that language and helped develop that pathway, getting information to counselors so they're ready to go with registering any juniors that might be interested in that for next year. So we know that's a need in the community and help support our health careers. And then in the health career pathway, athletic trainer. So each high school will have that course available, and we worked in collaboration with all of our athletic trainers, and Sanford, Avera, and OI, thank you, with OI, and their athletic trainers are getting certified because they just need the CTE endorsement so they can teach, and they're all very, very excited, and we have the support of the 3 healthcare professionals with that. So good work for our for interest for our students. So we'll see what registration looks like. And then we're expanding our cybersecurity pathway. We have that cybersecurity at CTE, and currently, and that's in partnership with DSU, and we're looking at adding more coursework into the buildings to help support that pathway, and that's just in the developing processes. Again, talking to DSU because they now have a Dean of Cyber Security, and then also with Digital Promise on a partnership on cybersecurity and developing that pathway. You know, with the research lab going right out here in Sioux Falls, the DSU, we know that we have plenty of opportunities to support that. And in the schools, we're looking at game design, not gaming, but game design as a pathway that helps build foundational skills to get them to that CTE.
We also just got a grant that supports coding and a few things connected to this that reinforces some of the things we're doing. But this is an area I think we'll want to continue to look at for how robust we could build it out to in different areas, as well as this will probably be part of our after-school programming. But that was a nice time as we look at this.
It's a good time. And then the next one, the last area is targeted professional development. And so, again, targeted professional development to support all district employees and to improve those outcomes. And we really wanted to make that visible because we know there is a lot of things going on out there. But then how do we promote that and show what we're doing? So Deanne's team, Megan, has worked with Sarah to start putting this together. This is on the backside. It's not public yet. So we're going to show you. Oh, okay. All right. And before I jump further into that, we are developing a Sioux Falls Professional Learning Advisory Team, and that advisory team actually meets today. And they're going to help us design Inspire, that summer conference, and asking for support and help on what we bring in, what our teachers interested in, and how we do that. So that's new to us. Usually we do that as a team down here, but we had teachers submit ideas, and now we have the team of teachers coming together with SFEA. So now that professional, okay. It's really good. That's what they tell you when you can't see it. But one area that I know we haven't, we have the information, and as of Friday it wasn't in there, but the bus drivers, we're doing training with the bus drivers. So PBIS training this week with bus drivers. And we also did some training with them early in the year, so we didn't have that listed. So again, this is in development, and we'll push it back out to everybody that has done training to review it to see what we forgot, so we can make sure we get that. And then moving forward, we can put future dates and times in there, so that way the employee groups can go in and talk. So, okay. Okay, perfect. Correct. No, this is truly what our staff have offered for employee groups throughout the year. So, and it'll be on our internal website too. No, that's exactly. So, okay. And then program updates. Fine Arts Curriculum Study. This is our first year of the Fine Arts Curriculum Study. We finalized tentatively the mission and the vision last week with that curriculum group, steering committee. And next year we'll continue that work and look at adoption. And within that time, I believe esports will come in. Today I got a couple of emails from different districts saying, hey, we're looking for teams. So it's out there and it's really starting to develop. The next one is World Languages and English Language Development Study. We're in the second year of that. That will come forward with curriculum suggestions for adoption in March to the board. And then we have the Science Curriculum Study, same thing, second year. And that recommendation will come forward. I believe it's the first April board meeting with that curriculum study. And next is the gifted learner study. So Linda and the team, the gifted learner team, have really been looking at the delivery model, identification of students for a gifted learner. And we had done that back in 2018, and as prior to that, where we used the Nagler area to screen all second grade students, nonverbal tests to see, make sure we weren't missing anybody in identification process for gifted learner. This year, they started with the COGAT and gave the complete test to a pilot group in the fall of second graders to see if we're identifying any more students. As of those 8 schools that were tested, we did not identify more students, but we're going to complete that with all the rest of the second graders this spring with a COGAT just to see and get a complete look at the district. And then we'll make a decision, do we continue with the COGAT because it's more costly and time intensive, or do we go back to the negative and just really look at that? So it's been a good look at what we thought. We were going to identify more, but so far we haven't, so we'll see. Next one's Spanish Immersion Program Review. So ACTFL was here. They were here 5 years ago and did a complete program review. Since that time, we've added the two-way immersion programs at Rosa Parks and Hayward, and they just gave us the report. We're reviewing that for accuracy. The principals are coming together with us on Friday to go through that, and then we'll give them recommendations for any edits back, and then it will come to you on February 13th as a board report, and then after that time we'll share that report with the World Language Advisory Committee. So it comes to you first on February 13th.
Teresa, does that report encompass high school as well?
It does, yes. It went, added the two-way immersion, middle school and high school. So it's a comprehensive report, which we didn't have that, at that time with the last report. So it's really a good report to look at and suggestions for us moving forward. And that will give us our strategic goals as we move forward for the program.
Thank you.
And then the last one is the Learning Management and Assessment Platform Study. So throughout the fall, we've looked at vendors for a learning management system, K-12. So right now we have Seesaw at elementary, Schoology at middle school, and Google Classroom at high school. So how do we have a complete K-12 system to support all students, families, and teachers? So that way, if as a student transitions between levels, they're using the same platform. If a parent has students in multiple levels, they're using the same platform. And so we're really looking at finalizing that. We had a last presentation on Wednesday last week, and now Emmett, Nicole, and I will come together, review the pricing, and make a selection, and then look at the professional learning that needs to happen for our staff and how we roll that out. The thing we liked about the Common LMS is that it creates, it has a curriculum map tied to standards, and within that, then the teachers are putting their information. We have the assessments, and then we can pull reports, and we can see how our students are doing maybe in 3rd grade in ELA on certain standards, or 6th or 7th. And it really gives us that great lens. And so that kind of feeds into that work session we'll have in March that talks about assessments and how we support that. And then future priority recommendations for academic success is that K-12 learning management system and assessment platform. So we'll really look at laying that out and how we support that with the professional learning moving into next year. MTSS and PBIS implementation, it's year 3 for MTSS, year 2 for PBIS next year. And then that community learning center model, that growth with Rebecca Wimmer and our after-school programming, and how do we help continue to grow that with the community, talking about different opportunities for students. Is it cyber? Is it lacrosse? Is it soccer? I mean, all those different options. And then college and career readiness, continue to look at those career pathways. As Dr. Stavum mentioned, that STEM grant, how does that start? That's targeted for elementary and middle. How does that grow up into our cyber academy in our high schools and out at CTE? But then how do we connect our middle school encore, reviewing that middle school encore selection that tie into our pathways. And so those are our recommendations from academic success for the updates for this year and moving into next year. Questions?
Pause between each area if you want to talk about anything specifically with this. For context, Dr. Boyson, would you talk about learning management systems prior to COVID, what we did quickly, and why we're looking at this for the future?
Right. So prior to COVID, high school used Google Classroom on and off. I mean, select few would use that. We'd have middle school using Google Classroom. And we were dabbling with Schoology at that time, a small pilot of that at middle school level, but they had the most experience. And nothing at elementary. There were a few teachers that would use Google Classroom, but nothing systematic. And then moving into COVID, it was fast and furious, knowing we needed something to support the exchange of information and also that alignment across each of the levels. So then that's where Seesaw came in for elementary. And Schoology was, it was underway at middle school, so they just pushed it further. And then Google Classroom was required at the high school level as a system. So that's where we came with the three differences between the levels, but really knowing that as parents, that's very confusing if you have to jump between platforms. As teachers, if teachers move between levels, same thing, but students, when they move from 5th to 6th, that's a new learning that has to happen. Same thing from 8th to 9th, new learning that has to happen. With a learning management system, we'll create a district template, and that district template will set the format for each class, so it'll look the same. So it doesn't matter if I open up 5th grade social studies, or I open up 6th grade ELA or 9th grade algebra, that format is the same, but the teacher can customize it for their look. But then the student knows this is where I go to get this information. This is where I go to find out what I'm doing this day. This is how I communicate back and forth with my teacher through that platform, or this is how the teacher gives me feedback. And then for the parent, the portal looks the same. It doesn't matter what grade they're at. So it will be a great system, but again, creating that plan for teachers to start with slowly to help support them with their needs, and then also how do we get the information to parents with that too. So big process, but we'll get it. And it's exciting. It really is.
That's one of the points of feedback that we get from parents, and I think it's in my later slides where we're going to talk about that beginning of the year, but just the number of platforms. We know that that is one area that we want to keep trying to streamline. We've gotten better with our website and some of our communication tools, but this is a big part of where that still comes into play.
I love seeing the college and career readiness pushed on the middle school encore. I just think the earlier we can have kids engaged is fantastic. My question is, if I have a student that doesn't have encore because they're having other things added to their schedules, supports like for their English or math supports, for example, will they still be able to access this or have that added to their schedule?
That's a good question, because we know we do have students that maybe it's Spanish language arts, and so they might have one encore. We've done some things with the middle school schedule at a couple buildings where directed studies is not, we know that we can do better, and so they've done some different things with that, and that would be possibly an option then to incorporate it in that space. So good question. Things for us to think about.
Yeah, or if they're doing chorus and band, for example, too. I think
Right.
that's the other idea.
Mm-hmm.
The middle school schedule is always under discussion
Yes.
heavily with some very definite opinions, but for all the right reasons, because there are just many things that are a priority in those transition years, particularly from wanting to reinforce academically before they're at high school level work, but also then the exploratory nature of middle school in how they are ready to choose their high school options. So middle school is a really pivotal time for a lot of reasons, which then impacts scheduling and all of those pieces that are woven in.
I think, and to piggyback on that and what Cynthia said, I think for, you know, when a student in middle school is limited to maybe one encore class or, you know, giving them choice. I know that just from my experience, I had a student that was limited and he didn't really get to choose what encore classes he wanted, and maybe it was just because of scheduling or what have you, or if we require CTE or we require certain encore classes, but allowing them more choice, I think, just again enables them to think more about their choices and maybe you know, moving on into what they might be interested in. Because it is exploratory. Exactly.
And that's also why the after-school program and our summer offerings are a piece of that. You want the bulk of that to happen during the regular school year, but the more opportunities we can create to grab it in other places too, that's just more avenues to try some things.
So the next area that we'll go through and discuss is the area of well-being. And truly in the area of well-being, the key statement is there is the supports that we need to help our students, staff be successful academically and socially. So we'll go through some of those things. I'll fairly quickly go through the next couple slides, which are a repeat of our initiatives and some of the areas that we target, and go through some of the new things that we have been doing this year and what we look forward to the next year. So first of all, the initiatives in the area of well-being. You will see these four being the same, but the first one is working with that MTSS process that Dr. Boyson has talked about. More specifically, we looked at the area of behavior. Now, we don't separate those two out necessarily because as they're going through in their buildings and working on MTSS, they're talking about both those things. They need to address the academic support as well as the behavioral support. So we a lot of times work on those two things together. For the purposes of this document, we have those separated in just working on some of those supports that go into the classroom. As Dr. Boyson worked on the academic things, we work on the behavioral supports, the social supports, some of those other things that are needed to make sure a student is successful. The second area in there is to provide access to supports for students and families and staff, and I'll talk about that a little bit coming up with some of the things that we're working on this year and the new initiatives for next year or what will continue into next year. The third of which, to align those programs and review those programs to make sure that we have those intensive supports that are needed. We've worked on that quite a bit over the last couple of years. Worked originally with the elementary programming, then looked at the Joe Foss programming. This year and at the current time, we're looking at the middle school and high school programming at the Axel Park. But not just solely there. We've also worked at the elementary schools with the allotment of the facilitators that go there and other supports that we have put in place as well. So I'll talk about that a little bit coming up. And the fourth area that we have as one of our initiatives is to provide the targeted professional development and truly to equip the staff. And as Dr. Boyson talked about, some of that choice and input that we're utilizing with the staff now to be able to create the Inspire Conference, but also the things that are being equipped for the building administrators going back and providing that professional development within their buildings throughout the school year. The progress indicators are listed there for you, and they stayed predominantly the same, and you'll have those in your booklet as well. And again, you see those key four areas. I'll break down a couple of these just a little bit as we go through this portion of it, but the first one in there is really working with that MTSS process, and we've worked on that for the last 2 years now, this being the second year, and there's still a couple more years to go on that. We had originally said it's a 4-year process, and it's going to take at least that 3 to 4 years. Dr. Boyson had touched on the Swiss model, and even just being in a couple of the elementaries this morning, the data that gives them is incredible. They can go through and look at their minor referrals or their major referrals and see exactly where that's happening, what time of the day that's happening, and to be able to celebrate some of those successes with staff so they can focus their attention, but truly giving them that support that they need with the information, the data. And we'll talk quite a bit more with them this coming Friday as Doug Morrison and his team goes through and shows them a whole new tool that they'll be able to utilize through Infinite Campus, but really focusing so much on the multi-tiered system of supports for the staff and the students, and the data that they can utilize to be able to implement some of those things. The family supports, I'm going to touch on some more of that, but we have multiple things that we're putting into place this year, and I'll highlight a couple of those coming up for you. Part of that also, it goes for the students, but it also goes for the staff. And I know Ms. Dorman will talk a little bit about the Employee Assistance Program and some of the programs that we have that are in place to help our staff. And then our community supports as well. That Community Engagement Center, but it goes well beyond that, and I'll talk a little more about that as well. The programming for the students, and again, when we look at that, our Native American population was an area that we had focused on with our Office of Indian Education and that department chair that works there. And some of the outreach that has been going on there. We've also looked at with our homeless population and to be able to impact those more effectively. And then our final area, the completion of the professional development by all teachers. And I would really say the PBIS model and the process that we've gone through has been the significant focus this year, because they go through still with the MTSS process, but really looking at PBIS so that all can be trained effectively in the PBIS model. So we'll look at some of those new implementations that we have for this year that are currently going on, and I'd be happy to answer questions on those as we go through. One thing that's been new that we provide for the well-being of all is our Family Forum series that's been going in a partnership with Avera, and these come out monthly, and they're on a variety of topics. The one that we just taped the other day was on healthy eating, and there's been a great number of individuals that have accessed some of those tools. I think the digital media, social media, something that I think we all have to address time to time, if not with ourselves, with our children and our youth. But that had, I think it's going over 800 and some now that have viewed that and utilized that information that way. And so some of the supports that are right here in our community, that has highlighted those so that they can go and access some of those supports right here in our community. The Comprehensive School Threat Assessment Guidelines we've been referring to as CSTAG. This goes through and the threat assessment process that we go through and complete to be able to assess safety and some of the protocols that we'll use. We've gone through and had training of CSTAG 1 and the second level of that, CSTAG 2, and we're starting to implement that as we've gone through and had meetings with our elementary level, our middle school and high school levels, with counselors, social workers, administrators, and then worked with IT folks and Doug Morrison and his team to go through and be able to put that online so that it makes it so much easier to utilize, and it ties back into each of the students so we can look at that information going from the elementary to the middle school to the high school, and it'll stay connected with the students so we know how to best help that. That's much in line also with what Dr. Boyson had talked about with our SAT teams, our student assistance teams, that information is going to be able to be kept in Infinite Campus now, so they don't have to use separate folders and separate ways to be able to track that information, so we can keep that consistent with the child and not have to repeat some of the things that have happened when they move from elementary to middle school. We'll just have that information right there so we can better help our students and our staff. The CSTAG training, we plan to implement that fully in this coming fall, so I'll talk about that a little bit coming up as well. The K-12 career counselor, that process has been put into place and been in effect now through the first half of this school year. Not quite halfway yet, but we're getting close to it. And that position has been in place and really works on a K-12 focus of what's our career assessment's going to be, the individuals to be able to access that information going from the elementary all the way up and through. And so that person has been focused on that. We do have to utilize that individual currently to fill a position because we had a loss of a counselor at one of our schools, and so they were going to take some time to be able to cover that for the short term and then be back into that, doing that work. And they share a lot of information with our school counselors. So they go back in and provide that information to the school counselors so that they have that. It's one person, so obviously they can't be everywhere to every person. They make sure that the counselors who will have that contact with the kids have that information so they can share it out with the families, and the counselors will continue to share that information so that we better prepare our students for their careers. The department chair for Office of Indian Education, that had changed this past year and moved into a department chair position. And that individual had been on a TOSA type position where it's going to be short term. That moved into more permanent position so that they can help in the Office of Indian Education and with our Native American students, and has done an outstanding job going out there to make sure the curriculum is aligned, the programming is aligned and it goes through, but has been working through that. So that's another one of the things that we had started new this year. The implementation of the mental health supports at Axtell Park program. That came into play when we had our psychologist and our social worker that we hired over there new, and then in a partnership again with Avera, where they have a therapist, that goes over there and works with the students, and they actually have two, and another part-time individual that go over there and work with students just to be able to help them meet their needs on a daily, weekly basis so that it doesn't interrupt their education. And then the social workers, we have one full-time and one part-time this year that are working with specifically our homeless population. And that has been a significant change this year, that they're focusing specifically on that. Part of that comes through dollars that were specific for homeless that came through part of the ESSER dollars. And so it's a 2-year process in there that we have individuals that are going to work specifically with our homeless population. And a lot of that's going to be to help them with the resources that they can utilize within our community, and transportation. Transportation is one of the biggest things that they go through and support those families with. So with a lot of the new places for our homeless shelters opening up in the Sioux Falls area, Sioux Falls community, they make contact there and make sure those kids get enrolled in school and are able to get the transportation to school. But they obviously help across the entire district. Our goal there is really to bring some things in line and make it a little more seamless in that 2-year time period, so that when that position does go away, things are in place so that any of our social workers will be able to utilize that and know the process. Some priority recommendations that we have for the next 23-24. Obviously, we will continue in that implementation of the MTSS process. It was planned from the very start to be a 4-year process at a minimum, and that we will continue to do. To implement that CSTAG model, or the threat assessment model for school safety, that'll come online this coming fall. We're making sure that we get all the documentation in place and that it works through Infinite Campus so that they can put that directly into Infinite Campus, so it's not an additional task they have to complete. And then a multitude of things that we're working on, access to the supports for our Sioux Falls School District families and the staff. The Family Forum series I talked about, the department chair. Our Community Engagement Center is over at Axtell Park. They were just, matter of fact, the information just came out today, even opening up the food pantry that will be over there now. The families will be able to access at that one location. So we've tried to, with our EL families, homeless population, multiple other groups can go to Axtell Park and access that, whether it's clothing, some of the basic hygiene needs, and now we've added in the food pantry into that as well. So that's going to be over at that Community Engagement Center, which is located at Axtell Park. And then our social workers for the homeless, and we continue to work on that and have some things that are upcoming that we've utilized some of those ESSER grants that had to be specifically spent for our homeless population. Our intensive supports to meet the unique needs of all our students. We've talked about with the programs at the schools, and you'll get an update on that in February, where we look at some of the programming to make sure we don't have too many programs at one school, that we spread some of that out, because different programs can bring unique needs. And so we'll talk about that in an upcoming work session in February. But we also have the elementary facilitator allocations, and I talked to a couple of the elementaries just this morning, and so it's taking those behavior teams and placing them out into the schools, so they actually have the staff located at each one of the schools, and they're helping to write those plans of success for the students. And that the ones that we have talked to have greatly appreciated having the individual there instead of contacting a team that comes in and then that team leaves. But the one individual will stay there all the time to be able to help them. That's not new staffing necessarily. It's really utilizing what we had and putting it out in the buildings in a different model. And then our BCBAs have been a great asset as well, as we've hired them to come in and look at some of that data and help some of those teams create plans. Our targeted professional development, the PBIS has been significant, but obviously, as Dr. Boyson has talked about, creating that team so the staff can have input even more so on what we present during the Inspire conference. And then the K-12 counselor position, career counselor, and the implementation of the mental health supports at Axtell Park programs. So those are some of the things we look forward to continuing into the 23-24. Many of those had a 1 to 2 or 3 year process that it would take to complete fully. Questions that you may have?
I have a couple of questions. The first one would be, what kind of feedback have you gotten from staff members in regards to like looking at the Swiss? Like, it's great that we have all of this data. I'm curious how they feel. Like, is it easy for them to use? Is it, you know, having never seen what it is that they're looking at? Like, do they feel like, was there a learning curve? Is it something new that's added to them, or is it super user friendly and they can glance at it and really understand
And we
how
can
that works?
probably both answer parts of this. Even just meeting with some of the principals this morning, it replaced what they were doing as some of the minor tickets and some of the other tickets. So it replaced one system to a different system that we can now track the data on. And so when they were using, you know, whether that be Google Docs or some other form similar to that, in a lot of the schools, it just replaced that system with a system now that's very similar. But the new system, when I say similar, it's similar for them to be able to enter the data. The new system now allows to track all that information much easier. And it'll actually start to help to incorporate it in with information that we already have in Infinite Campus. And so you have to also realize that the schools are at different places. Some of the schools started a year and a half or 2 years ago, where this is the very first year they're starting with that process. So it all depends if they applied for that state grant or not and had the trainer come in.
Yep. And then when you think about looking at the data is available for the problem-solving teams in the building. So when the team comes together, they can pull up the building data. It's not an individual teacher. I can see my students, but I can't see the whole building's data. So again, it's that problem-solving team comes together, and then they can run the reports how they would like to see, are there hot spots or successes and celebrations, and so that problem-solving team really analyzes the data, the building-wide data.
There are trade-offs, though. And so, you know, some of our buildings looked for solutions on their own before either of these things might have been available, or they were using kind of a hodgepodge. And so as we look at unifying this, I can think of one of our schools that loves what they have been using, and they'll have to transition, but we have the continuity factor then, because if a student moves from place to place, which would be highly likely with some of our schools, including this one, we also want that to look seamless. Our teachers also move from school to school if they change positions or change locations. And so again, the more that we can align that process, and then Doug and his team have also been looking at some of the unutilized features that we have in Infinite Campus. And so it's a picture, it is a dashboard effect. I was with a team a few weeks ago that I told many of you about, that they were doing a wonderful job. They had some of their data in some Google Docs for how they look at different layers of it, grade level, classroom. But as soon as they had kind of a collective question mark about what was really happening kind of with some of the issues that they were seeing with a particular student, they said, well, pull up Swiss. As soon as they did that, they said, oh, it's not right before lunch, it's actually right before they're making this other transition. And they very quickly then said, all right, so what should we do about that? And they put a plan in place for a teacher to do a check-in with that student at that time when they seem to be experiencing difficulty. And so I think it's always, you know, multiple points of data. It's how easy can you get to it? How common is it from place to place? And then collectively as a district, if we want to pull data to say, are we overall getting better at, we can look by elementary, by middle, by high school, by grade level. So it has to equip both the school as well as the district. And that's where we're kind of trying to move to. So they might have to give something up in the process, but that's what we're looking at.
You know, as a teacher who's already maybe having challenges with behaviors, to have to then do something different or new, but I'm glad to hear that it was we're doing this instead of this versus we're doing these things, because at least, yes, it's new, but at least it's not duplicative work for them. And then I agree, like being able to kind of look, because I would imagine in some cases there is a student that's the common denominator of maybe some issues, either whether it's grade to grade or school to school, and sometimes we might even have staff members who just need additional professional development on whether it's behavior management or classroom management or whatever it might be. And so I think that that's awesome that those things can be identified. Just want them to be in like a non-threatening, like we're all here to work together kind of a environment, and not that somebody ever feels targeted by the data. So.
And PBIS is positive behavior supports, and so it's that 4-to-1 ratio. Am I getting 4-to-1 positives for correction or feedback? And so they track that too, because are we getting them that positive interactions to change the behavior? And sometimes we have to up that just a little bit too.
The other benefit that came from that was people who are there to help intervene and do planning sometimes become the ones to have a primary interaction with a student. This team intentionally said, I'm going to do this so that teacher can be the one to work with the student and not take something away from that relationship that you're trying to make sure is firmly in place. So that's some of the other unintended benefits of some of this work that we can do, is helping teachers know where to adjust. And hopefully that impacts the skills and the ownership of our teachers. But you're right, then if it continues to be an issue, what is it that's needed there? Is it on one side of this equation or is it on the other? And then we can be more diagnostic about that.
I have a question. In my mind, I'm operationalizing this a little bit. And not that I want to get too detailed, but just an example of what is on the dashboard and then how that teacher goes about tracking it. You know, at the end of the day, do they just enter something with each child and like, okay, I did something positive here? And, I mean, they have to, of course, operationalize it to work for them, but it just seems so general right now. Just a couple examples.
Right. So we have the PBIS trainers, and they did the Swiss training for their buildings, and so they just log in. It's very user friendly, and they can enter if it's a positive, positive ticket. They're just X's, and then if there was a minor or a major, they just have to give a little verbal information there.
So it's
then
that simple.
It's that simple.
Okay.
It really is, and so. It has to be enough information so we can see time, date. Of course, it's date stamped, but they have to put the time in there because I'm going in during my planning or after school during that planning time and putting that information in. But then it allows us to track it as a building, as a district, to see that and visualize.
Also on the buildings screen that they see, they'll see those, whether it be the minors, and they can see what time of the day, what area of the day, is it out for recess, is it at the lunchroom, to identify that where they're having some of the minor incidents happening. And so it gives them a screen of that. Then they can be able to drill down to see individual students, individual grades, individual classrooms by individual teachers. The teacher can see their classroom in much that same type of a format. But then there's the district view that is utilized by the administrator and that team, the student assistance team or the PBIS team.
Well, you could see from an administrator standpoint if you have a teacher that's having some classroom management fatigue or just being new to get the supports into.
Like Dr. Salem said, they thought it was before recess, and it really wasn't. Instead of going on what we think, we have the information to show us the time and the location, or we thought it was, I'm just going to make it up, third graders at recess, but it was really fifth graders in the lunchroom.
And then they're also utilizing that facilitator that they have in the building to help create some of those plans for some of the students to be successful in the classroom, and they can identify where some of those things are happening. Because to 1, 3, or 4 may be a significant issue, and yet when they look at the data, this other student, I need to create a plan for them and continually check in and connect with that student on a continual basis to help them be successful.
But then we saw the great results when they went back in after they evaluated the plans a couple weeks later, and the significant drop because they're communicating, they're pre-teaching, they're adding those positives and great successes for the students, which relates to learning and the environment.
Is this optional tool to use, or
Nope.
something
Nope.
that we're
It's
encouraging everybody to use?
it's district-wide.
I had one other kind of question slash suggestion. Sure. So I'm looking at some of the like professional development, and I'm thinking about like the behavior analysts, and I think about the mental health of all of our kids, whether it's kindergarten all the way through 12th grade and beyond. And I know number one, some of those specialists are limited in even being able to find them. There just isn't enough counselors in the world. There isn't enough behavior analysts in the world. And so I'm just thinking, like, how can we use them to do, and maybe we are, and I just am not aware, to help do some sort of development with, like, all classroom teachers, to give them lessons or ways to incorporate things and kind of do a blanket approach. I know it's obviously more effective if you can work one-on-one or in a small, group with a student, but I just can't help but think that there aren't things that we could do and incorporate them into like our lessons that we're already doing in kind of a therapeutic type of a way that maybe some of those people who have the have the expertise and they have that background could help interject into some of our classrooms. And I don't know if we are doing that, if that's something, do you understand what I'm trying to say?
And part of that is coming through with our BCBAs, having them go to some of the schools and provide some of that training to staff, especially if there's different or unique situations that are going on, and some of it could be behavior or other things. But they go and provide some very specific training, and they may have to move from different schools, or at times we'll locate them at one specific school for a little bit of an extended time. The psychologists, we had hired additional psychologists that will help much the same way and give it advice and help and support to those teams. But part of that we'll continue on to do through the Inspire Conference and even some of the training. So it comes in different forms. Our PBIS trainers, they're going through and working on that whole process, but they're not going to go into the therapeutic piece probably near as much to that sense, although the positive reinforcement can be a therapeutic sense. So we have been able to, over the last couple of years, be able to have, the PBIS trainers, there's 2 of which working district-wide. The BCBAs, we're working on hiring more of those psychologists we had last year through the budgetary process. We had added additional psychologists to be able to do that. But as far as the professional development piece, we continue to work on that and incorporate it into that throughout the Inspire Conference or the training that goes directly into the buildings. Elementary, they have a very consistent training process and professional development that they're doing district-wide, and they're given that training at their meetings, their monthly meetings, and they go through and do that professional development, and then they take that back to their building and incorporate that, and then at the next monthly meeting, they get the next set of that. And so utilizing that, going through and giving that to their staff.
And I'm kind of thinking about like the social emotional pieces of it too. Like when I think about therapeutic, I think about, feelings and kindness and like the things that kind of impact the environment of a classroom, but also just a student's awareness of themselves and awareness of others, which sometimes when your socialization comes from a device, you miss. And so I think that's kind of what I was thinking about is are there any like broad picture kinds of things that we could somehow try to incorporate to get more of that in?
Right,
And
and-
you don't have the answer today, I don't.
But just our new counseling curriculum that was adopted last year, that's a big piece of it. And so that's in all of our classrooms, K-8, and then in the high school, they get in the English classes. So that is a big piece of our counseling curriculum. But our PBIS coaches, trainers are working specifically with groups and not so much on social emotional, but training on supports, and with the EAs, with the behavior facilitators. Now they're holding triad meetings, and so they had their first one last week, really pulling them together and help developing those skills. And then, like I said, working with the bus drivers too on that whole process of what it looks like with the bus drivers and the EAs on the bus. So,
Thank you.
Yeah, good constant kind of infusion process. Good thoughts. Any other questions in this area? Okay, why don't I do community engagement and then we'll do a break. Does that sound okay? Okay. Our community engagement area, of course, is how we cultivate our relationship with our stakeholders. And this is going to be an area that I'm going to ask you to think about with me when we get to the end with our development section a little bit. But we know that this is a big part of many aspects that come into play with our district. So the initiatives that we had listed for this area this year, some of it's the same as last year. Celebrate and strengthen our existing strategic partnerships, those things that add value in so many areas. And just a reminder, we have our partnership breakfast coming up later this week. Prioritizing our stakeholder listening and learning events, promoting the value of public education through our Sioux Falls School District experience, and developing our community learning center model while we expand our after-school opportunities for students and families. Our progress indicators that we set out were the development of that whole CLC model to enhance our after-school opportunities, increasing our engagement with stakeholders through two-way communication tools, use of that feedback that we get through those community listening sessions, and then increasing over time that overall sense of belonging and well-being for students, staff, and community members through our connections to those district and community activities. So just some things to highlight in this area. Like I said, that second annual partner recognition breakfast is coming up, and we have more on the list than we had last year. We're excited about that, and just as we went to review that list and anticipate that event, there are just so many. We're always worried that we're going to leave something out, but we are truly amazed when we look at how many different partnerships we have. Then we have done 2 more of our Community World Cafes during our first semester, and then we have 2 coming in second semester. We had 1 scheduled for January, and I asked Deanne and Andrea to find a date in April for obvious reasons. We are sick of working around the weather, so we'll finish those other 2 up. And actually, it's a good thing because one of the things that we talked about after our first 2 this semester is we have some really good themes that continue to come through, and we get different flavors with each one. But we're kind of at a point now, after having done 6 of these, where we're going to use our 2 in March and April to take just a little bit different approach and grab some of those themes and ask those 2 groups to go a little bit deeper in some specific areas. So we're going to try that out and see if that gives us even deeper information when we do those next 2. But they're fun, and we've had such good turnouts for each of them. It's been really enjoyable to do them. The events and the initiatives based on that feedback, those are really important things, and I did not begin to list many of the things that I could point to. But one really good example is we talked about at the end of last year with our high school, or with all of our administrators, about looking through that cultural lens and really thinking through the feedback that we had gone over with everybody from all of the World Cafes that we did last year. And coupling that with the surveys that we do, the comments that we get, and really making sure that as we planned for this year, people were taking that feedback and using it. So Washington High just recently did a FAFSA event. If you're a parent of a high schooler, you know what that awful acronym means. It's scary to a lot of people. It's kind of the gateway to a post-secondary opportunity, and it's filling out that financial aid form. And so they made this actually a district event. They invited parents from any of the high schools. They had liaisons there. They had language interpreters there. And they did it in such a way to account for the feedback that we had gotten about, this is something I don't quite understand. This is something that I'm not sure if this has implications for other things. If I share this information, is that, you know, a good thing or not? And it went well. Then we were able to take that and say, what would happen if we had more supports there for next year? And we have some community partners, again, who are interested in supporting that kind of work for increasing that college and post-secondary going rate. We have great scholarships open to students in South Dakota. We want to make sure that we're taking advantage of those. And what does that mean to help more and more families all the time enter a post-secondary opportunity for a 2-year or 4-year program? So that was really good to hear that they had done that and had really taken that on. Crowd Loop, we're in year 2. We're hoping to expand use of this tool. This is where we put it out to our staff and say, what's your best idea? What could we do that's new and different? We actually get a lot of really good practical suggestions that we're able to put in place right away, but then we have bigger ideas. And so we're trying to expand this also to begin using it possibly with students, possibly with parents and families in a little bit different way. It's somewhat different than a regular survey because you can interact with the ideas that are put in. Carly Youthy was going to be kind of taking this on, and now Carly has a new opportunity. So we're just a little bit delayed in how we're going to carry this out. But what we did was we took what we think is kind of the best idea that was put forth, and now we've put it back out to say, okay, this was a great idea. Tell us more about this and give us more detail before we kind of reveal what that is. So another tool that we're continuing to use, determining its value and then continuing from there. Increased family engagement. We have more people going to our website than ever before. We have our communication tools and our apps and our bus app, and we talked about that with our LMS, our learning management system, and what can we continue to do. But we know people are going to those tools weekly. We go in and look in Let's Talk, and there's people that continue to ask about the bus app. Missy Bracken has done an amazing job of helping people access that, but fewer and fewer questions, which means now people have it, they're using it, and we'll think through what does that look like next year as we have new kindergarten families or new families to the district. How do we help them access those tools easily, quickly, and continue to bring coherence to that? Attendance, we have a new feature there that was brought in to report and process absences designed to reduce phone calls to the office in the morning.
I love it.
Yay.
I do.
Raise a hand if you've used it. Yep, it's great. And that was due to Doug and Nicole and their department saying, we think we can utilize this feature for a better process and outcome. And I'm sure that's been a welcome change in our schools. And then we just recently announced our after-school transition to that new model that we've talked about. Rebecca did a board report right before our break, and that is shaping up. Now we have some information that we continue to push out to make sure people know we're adding more opportunities, not removing them. And this is just a great time now as people are registering for those placements for next year. So really important work there. And then finally, new and strengthened partnerships. We have many things that we can point to. Our Pepper Entertainment for the guitars, our ag program getting started, and many community people associated with that. Oops, and I didn't take out my checklist. I wanted to make sure I got the right organization, which is Groundworks, is a new partner with community gardens, students wanting to do more with farm to table kinds of things. They've been great partners with that. The Avera Parent Series. And I put neighborhood soccer on there for a specific reason. I just had lunch with Tamian Dysart last week, who has been involved with this, Randall Beck, and their organizations, because this is an example of this. You put Thrive in, our community learning center model, and you begin to feel this synergy where parents, kids, they're coming together, they're in those neighborhood hubs. Our schools have helped support that, and you begin to see exactly what we want to see happen, which is people engaging with each other and with activities, and it's been a really great partnership, and they've seen such success with that program, and we're happy to help with that, what it looks like having it on our school grounds. So those are just a few of the examples, and we'll celebrate more of that on Friday. I think that's my last bullet on here. Oops. So priority recommendations for next year, just things to think about. We'll have continued implementation of that CLC model because that is just very much in process. We'll probably retain most of the existing language for the district priorities in this area just because they're somewhat general and allow things to happen within those areas. We're going to talk about this during our board development section, and we're trying to think about more intentional ways to network our families at school events. We often see that cycle where we want parents to connect to school, connecting with students, but we need to rethink that just a bit. We'll spend some time talking about that based on our feedback. And then we'll continue using our World Cafe, but wanting to utilize those themes. And we see our schools that are beginning to connect that work with their school improvement plans, and we want to continue that. So with that, I'll take any questions. Otherwise, Becky will be up next after the break.
An area that when we start talking about stakeholders, it becomes such a kind of a complex area that has lots of layers, lots of different individuals and what their role is within being a stakeholder. When I looked at the first slide, something that stuck out in my mind is that we're really strong in our internal communications, the intra part of it, how we're communicating amongst ourselves and with our parents and those community partnerships that are having a role within the school district. But a segment of the stakeholders that I have kind of some questions about when I looked over the definition of our stakeholders is this idea of the business and schools, and a particular business within that would be what our engagement looks like since we're strong with the internal communication, what that communication looks like with our media outlets. I'm convinced a few years ago when we looked at that bond referendum, we were able to get it passed by 80% approval rate of those that voted. And I think that our media, our local media, played a big role in our ability to be successful. I'm also sympathetic that the media doesn't always get it right? Sometimes they shine things in a light that maybe isn't the best light of whatever body they're covering. But with good journalism, they also have a role to play, and that is bringing up the different perspectives on certain issues. But historically, for the school district, my experience has been more positive stories. For example, I think it was around the middle of December when they covered our after-school programs. I think there was a lot of good that came from that. And I think that that is a stakeholder group that historically has been really strong partner, particularly with those stakeholders that have kids that do not have kids currently attending school. And they're so critically important to the priorities of our district and how we're able to continue to move those forward, whether it's building new schools or whether it's ideas on better attendance rates so we can continue to improve graduation rates. So I just, when we start thinking about the next year, the second slide, that was just an area of that, I think that was the first one, maybe the second one of what we want to look like going forward. There again, it looked really strong with those, the internal communication, but I think we could see some really great outcomes in looking at what that relationship looks like with just our local media in general, and being able to get those awesome stories of the work that you all are doing out to the larger group in the community.
Yeah, we'll certainly look at that. We've had a number of great stories that have been done this year. And I meet regularly with those radio TV leaders particularly, and they have done some great video footage as well as press coverage. So we'll take a look at that, see if we can work that in some different ways. But you're right, they help us tell that story, as well as our own capacity increasing with our new webpage and some of the ways we push that out on our own. And our media request form has worked really well this year. And so that's a way that we can also get people what they need very quickly. And they've been able to come out and do some stories that have been really timely. So we appreciate that as well. Good. Other questions or comments in this area?
So it'll just, those priority recommendations, I'm not sure if we're still looking to kind of impact that, but just that overall idea of how we're viewing the media, how the media is viewing us, and some, even the stories that we could work on collaboratively, and just continuing to think about that larger stakeholder group and how they're informed of all the great work that all of you do day in and day out for the benefit of our students.
Yeah. It's 3:46. Let's come back at 4:01. Then you get official 15 minutes. And it's already going faster than I expect, so let's reconvene.
People who I want that actually know what's going on.
Next section, staff excellence. Becky, you have the clicker?
I've got it. Okay. So staff excellence, you're going to see a familiar theme, and that's building professional capacity. And there's also a few other components that goes along with our staff initiatives. The building professional capacity in all staff, focus on intentional, and that's the key word is intentional. Staff recruitment, recognition, and retention activities. Encourage staff through grants and light bulb learning projects, which you've heard in our other presentations. And then our progress indicators, how do we know what we're doing is what we need to be doing? We're increasing our retention rates in all groups, and we have a special focus on hard-to-fill positions. We collect feedback from staff, and what else goes along with collecting the feedback is implementing that feedback. The recruitment of diverse employees, and then implementing that feedback that we get from our staff through the light bulb learning submissions or really any other mechanism of feedback that we use with staff. Some updates for you. We're really able to dive into what our shortage areas are and be very specific with the hiring bonuses that we offer to teachers in these areas. I feel like, last year was a very telling year for the Midwest. I think we can recognize that a teacher shortage has finally hit South Dakota where it's been in other parts of the United States. Well, it's here now. As a department, I think we feel so much more equipped after living through last year and now moving forward with this year. We have in place strategies to support teacher retention in special education. We're providing 3-year stipends. So if you are a special education teacher, we're in year number 1 of getting an additional $2,000 stipend, and that'll continue next year and the year after. We pay bonuses for our teachers to transfer into special education. So we're really keying on those people who have special ed degrees but might be teaching in an area outside of special ed. Come on back. Come back to special education. And those who've always wanted to teach special education but didn't have the education behind them, we are welcoming them to special education and then funding their tuition to become certified in special ed. Just this January, we developed a student teacher compensation program to attract the talent in the shortage areas that we need. So if you are a student teacher this January in the area of special education, high school, math, or science, and then orchestra, band, or vocal music, you are getting a $1,000 stipend for student teaching in Sioux Falls. And then we are also of course, looking very closely to hire you just as soon as we're able to do that. And we're getting ready to roll out our first ever District Service Year Award program, and that's what I have right here. We are honoring years of service for almost all staff, because if you've been here a year, you get one of these cute little pins. And then it goes 5, 10, 15, so on, all the way up to, we have, I believe, a custodian that's going to be here for 50 years, so he's going to get his pin, so that's pretty cool. The recognition that we'd done in the past was when we had our retiree banquet, we would invite those with 25 years. So now we're really recognizing, all the milestones here. So, and we do believe that, when someone's been here for a year, that needs to be celebrated. If you've been here for 5 years, that's great, let's make it 10, right? So we're excited to roll that out this spring. So there'll be more on that, I'm sure. Okay, based on feedback from substitute teachers, we did survey them at the end of the last school year. And then plus an intentional step to recruit more substitute teachers, they will begin weekly pay next month through the Rapid Pay Card program. So those of you that have a Venmo account or have ever used Venmo, it's going to work a little like that. We're going to pay you each week on your Rapid Pay Card. To account for taxes, you'll get 75% of what you would normally make. And then at the end, our typical payroll, we're going to balance that. And if we owe you a little more because the taxes came out that way, we give you that. Once that money is on your Rapid Pay Card, you can either use that to spend off of it, kind of like you can with Venmo, or you can transfer it to your typical bank account. So we're excited to roll that out. Training starts Friday, so we have several different training sessions, and there's been a lot of traffic because we'll have about 700 substitute teachers stopping in to pick up their personalized Rapid Pay Card. So that's been fun and interesting and definitely learning for our department. Okay, feedback from our new teachers reflected their desire for HR to really customize their onboarding. And, you know, that's actually something that we recognized as well. We hire, you know, from people right out of college to people who've been doing this for 20, 30 years. And the way they start a job and the questions they have looks completely different. They're concerned about different things. So we are developing a session or many sessions where we're going to try to group those people. And instead of having one big day of orientation, orientation is going to start in June. And so we're going to have a group in June, like 4 groups in June actually, groups in July, and then those that didn't really move to town till August will get you right before school starts. So we're going to see if that helps meet that desire for that more customized experience in our HR department. Last year, we created a custodial supervisor role, and that role was to focus on training and support of our new custodians. This person has now implemented a performance incentive program for custodians, and that's great because that hits our brand new custodians all to our very experienced custodians, challenging them to do what it takes to get just a little bit better, and then they are rewarded with gift cards. So, so far that has been a very popular, big success, and we really like to hear about the growth that's happening in all areas for our custodians. And here's where we talk a little bit about the ideas that came together through our crowdsourcing innovation, and we are studying a clerical coach to support the new staff or transferring staff into their positions. Those clerical roles are very diverse, and you could be performing the same type of role but at a different school, and the jobs look different, right? So we're really seeing if this coach would be a solution to some training and really give people what they need to get started in their new roles, or if they choose to transfer into a new role. We just wrapped up a survey of our wellness program, and I believe we're going to be getting the results at our next insurance committee meeting, so I'm anxious to hear what our staff are looking for in a wellness program. It's been a while since we did a refresh. It might be time for a refresh, so I think this survey should give us some good information. And then looking forward to next year, here's some things that we hope to be able to move forward with, and that's restructuring that new teacher orientation. We are going to continue to examine our recruitment and staffing strategies for the hiring climate that we're in. We'd like to do some extended onboarding for our classified staff. Instead of saying, hey, good luck, we'll see you know, when you enroll for benefits, we want to be able to get out into schools and be able to talk to our classified staff just to see how they're doing, how we can help them, just get some feedback from them on how their onboarding experience went. We're going to be analyzing our weekly pay for substitute teachers and then determine if it's feasible to do this for other groups. We know in our community that weekly pay is happening. And so we need to see if it's something we can do. We need to take a look at our education assistant job duties and make sure making sure we're competitive, aligning those duties with the compensation that's offered. We also need to take a look at our wellness survey data and see if our platform needs to change based on what staff needs. That's it.
Questions, comments?
Well, I love the idea of the recognition pins. I think that that's, I mean, it's a little symbolic, but it goes a long way. I know working at Avera, we do the same thing. We give out 5-year pins and people, or 10-year pins, and people put them on their badges proudly. And I think it just goes to show like, hey, I'm really proud to work where I work, and here's a symbol of that. So I think it's a very simple recognition, but it goes a long way. So it's a good step.
I love the weekly pay, and I think it's so funny because sometimes you're like, well, we just always get paid monthly, like that's what we do. And so when you try to think outside the box and think of something new, that's awesome. We just implemented at my employer where we get paid every other week, but you can actually advance your paycheck if you wanted to. And it's not, there's no fees, there's no, but it's an interesting concept because sometimes you just need that extra couple $100 and then you just get the rest of your paycheck. So I think there's definitely a movement of trying to be more flexible around what people need to make their ends meet and to support their families. And so I think that this is a really great first step. And if it's something that goes really well, I think teachers would really appreciate that too. It maybe helps them to budget better or support their family in different ways. And so I love the idea, and I hope it goes well, and that it's something that other staff members would be able to utilize as well.
Especially, if you think about if we have spouses who work at the district, and if they are really like an example of that. And so to do that flexibility, we've talked about this for a long time, so guidance and implement it and analyze it.
That's a great work.
Okay. Last but certainly not least, Mr. Veek.
Yeah, talking about effective use of resources. And our 4 main areas. First of all, analyze future facility needs to accommodate growth. We've, we picked the site for the Northwest Elementary out by George McGovern. That's going to open in the fall of 2025, so that got done this year. We're still analyzing where we can bring community campus back together. Right now it's split now between at the mall, the Western Mall, and at Axtell Park, and we're looking for a site that can bring the whole program back together and maybe a few other things as well. So hope to probably have that picked sometime in the summer, actually. And the other thing we're dealing with in this area is the community center spaces now being turned back over to the schools. So getting those ready for after-school programming or whatever else might be the most effective use of those. So those are kind of the 3 big areas there this year. Next, I think, is transportation and student engagement. We've had a real issue the last couple of years with hiring bus drivers, or our partner, SBI, has. And it's hard to expand busing opportunities for kids in that atmosphere. But we've been running 2 pilot programs, and we're trying to evaluate. I'll show you that here in a little bit. Trying to evaluate whether they're effective at getting kids to school or not, and we'll look at those in a little bit later. But that's kind of what they've been focusing on as well. And then, of course, we kind of dove headfirst in with the new apps and trying to get parents to be able to be, and students to be more engaged with where the bus is, if it's running late, if it's on time, and whatnot. We had scheduled SBI in last Wednesday to talk to you all about that during the work session. We're trying to get them rescheduled for 2 weeks from today, and I think that's going to work out. So they'll come in and answer your question. I know a lot of people have questions on that, and we'll go through some of their successes and some of the issues they still have there. So there's more to come on that, and that'll be in 2 weeks. Third is the child nutrition program. Last year we showed you that, last year was a free lunch for every, free meals for every student, and the year before it was as well, and how the program had grown, and the hopes were that when we get back to regular pay for the meal, that it would, because you still continue to see that growth, not that level, of course, but over what it had been prior to when meals were free for everybody. And we got some data on that. I'll show you in a little bit as well. And then last for us, and also not least, advanced fiscal responsibility, trying to take the ESSER funds, and what we've really been focused on, the ESSER funds and some of the expansions we've done with that, and be able to slide into that. Back in the Great Recession, schools got basically double their federal money 1 year, and I was like, here you've got this federal funding cliff. Be smart about it. Well, this is the federal funding cliff times 10 almost here, and we're trying to come up with a orderly plan to kind of ease into getting off, getting away from that money. Then last year for that is next fiscal year that we'll be budgeting for, or we're currently budgeting for right now. So our plan is to try to ease into weaning ourselves off that federal money, and I think we've got a pretty good plan in place, but that's what we've been focusing on there. Okay, the progress indicators, increased participation in after-school programming. That's mostly about Rebecca Wimmer's program, and making sure we have the space to accommodate those. Increased attendance in new identified areas. We'll look at that in a minute. I just talked about that. Meal participation rates, we talked about that as well. And then try to maintain one of the 12 districts, including us, try to be in the bottom half of that group in what our property tax obligations are compared to our neighbors, our immediate neighbors around here. So we'll look at some of this. So as I mentioned before, what we're doing right now is kind of not reacquiring, I guess, but acquiring the community center spaces and folding those into our programming needs. So that's the big focus there. And that will inevitably lead to increased after-school participation programs because of more space available, as well as hopefully continuing with that even beyond the community center coming to the schools. On the transportation options, actually they're pretty flat. We looked at this group. Oops, I really skipped ahead, didn't I? We're looking at this group at two different schools, one a middle school and one an elementary school. And one in the elementary school, a lot, the attendance is actually worse. So maybe there's other outside indicators. You certainly don't not go to school because you have a bus ride available to you now versus having to walk, or your parents have to get you there. But it isn't yielding the results we had hoped for. And in the middle school program, and we're only halfway through the year, but in the middle school program, it's kind of mixed. It's slightly up, but not a ton. So we'll just have to, in our budgeting process, see is that you keep a program like that, we're trying to implement it to get attendance up when maybe that's not working, but we're gonna examine that through the budgeting process. So the results haven't been, we did one a few years ago before COVID at SBA, where the results were really great. Is the kids, their performance in school, what they looked like in the year prior to busing and then with busing, and then we implemented that one fully. This other one, we're just not quite seeing those types
Cynthia,
of results.
Yeah,
question?
so once the program started at these two schools, was there any follow-up with families or with students or with the teachers as to maybe why it hasn't been successful?
Well, that's what we're gonna,
Okay.
that's what we're gonna look into here before we make a recommendation to the board on what to do with that. Because, yeah, you know, it's, there's lots of other things. I think I saw a note on one student that there was a suspension involved or something, you know, so there are other things obviously in play. But, yeah, that's what we're gonna follow up with the two principals and try to figure out if we continue, how to actually make it more effective, where we can get the attendance up. And then on the meal participation rate, so we went back to the last fiscal year where for the full year it was you know, the regular system in place. And so this is real interesting. The breakfast is way up this year. Talking with Gay Anderson about that, they've gotten to choices instead of prepackaged breakfasts, and at the middle and high schools, the secondary schools, they actually have a warm breakfast available, and they see participation is way up there. So that's a positive. The breakfast is you know, up a third. Lunch, daily average sales, it's actually been a 1% decrease, and we've talked about that. And really, there's a couple of things that seem like it can come into play. Like almost across the board, our elementary, middle school, and high school free and reduced lunch status is down about 4 or 5 points at each one of those levels. So you don't have as many kids that are getting to participate in the National School Lunch Program there. So that might be a factor. And then kind of going along with the a la carte sales, the food costs have gone up. Inflation's been high. Food costs are even greater than that. So you have to build that into your program and charge, you know, so that if you go and pay for a meal, if a student pays 100% of the meal cost and then there is a slight federal subsidy on top of that, you're supposed to recoup the cost of that meal. So that's driven the prices up a little bit higher. Also on the free and reduced percentages, they adjusted every year, it didn't go up 8% like inflation did. And a lot, you know, we've seen it with our staff, we've had to increase our salaries. So a lot of people just outpaced the free and reduced number limits. So they weren't able to participate that way. So that's kind of what you're seeing there. And then the a la carte sales too, you can't lose money on a la carte sales. So you've got to keep up with the price of the meals or of the food. So that is, we believe, driving that. And I think I had a fourth thing, but I can't think of what it is. But anyway, the breakfast has been a real win. The lunch, one other thing is the meal. Just like in our busing industry, the transportation industry can't get enough drivers. So you're real sporadic on whether the items that are supposed to arrive today so they can serve them tomorrow are going to come in, or do they have to do substitutions and whatnot. So that industry is kind of suffering from the same issue we are in with our partners, SBI, trying to get bus drivers, and we see it in some of, you know, Becky was talking about special ed teachers and whatnot. So that's another factor in that you just don't have you're not able to serve the meals you necessarily like to in all your buildings because you only get half of what you ordered. So that's what's going on there. And then we updated this. So the latest data we have is the 2022 taxes, and of our neighbors, we're eighth or fourth from the bottom, or fifth from the bottom out of 12. Our levy was 827 in 2022. I left on, it's 760. It's 760 is the lowest, and the highest is 11. Yeah, 60 cents. No, I left the 7 off there. It's 760, and the highest is 1114. So much closer.
We're pretty close to the bottom, the lowest.
Yeah.
And we're
Yeah. And I think oh, yeah. What we want to maybe keep doing is working with community partners to enhance after-school options at all levels. And this is the more, the facility side of it. Like I said, Rebecca's working on the actual delivery side of that. But just to continue to look for options there to provide more space and make it so they can save money by being in our schools rather than having to transport them to another entity. Determine that and finalize that. And transportation, we want to keep working on this, getting this GPS app where all of our stakeholders, I think with about 35% actually downloaded our app. And I'm told that's a really good starting number. You'd like to drive that up. And you'd also, one thing we've talked about them is, especially in the last month or so, when they can't get down some of the neighborhood streets, is to create an alternate kind of like a emergency route map and where you can actually get it to work on your app. So that's something we're gonna try to stress for next year as an option. So buses can't, we're really kind of limited when you only the emergency snow routes basically are plowed because buses are going to get stuck. You saw it last week. So maybe we can get the buses close and people just have to know what those alternate routes are. And then hopefully that would get them to use the app. So we're going to work with them on that. Child nutrition, we're transitioning to EAs who kind of reported to the building principal in the past. Now they report to child nutrition and make them advocates for the programs at the elementary level. And again, we're trying to take our 2 staff dietitians and get them out and talking with kids and about not just about eating the school lunch program, but healthy eating. And fiscal responsibility, and I talked about that earlier, try to budget that within our 5-year framework where we will not 5 years from now have the ESSER funds. So we'll build a budget to fit into that. That's it. Questions?
Is there a way to know who's downloaded the app? I mean, can we get those that demographic so that we can then send out blasts to those that haven't?
I believe we can tell who has downloaded it. So yeah, that's maybe something we can work on the rest. Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah, I mean, I know it's hard. I mean, being in, I'm sure Carly could say this too, being in the health industry, we all have our own apps too, and getting members to, buy in and download them and use them is a challenge, but just keeping blasting information out.
And really, if we're at 35% this year, I mean, a third of the people in the first year, when we kind of rolled it out right at the beginning of the year, it's not like there was stuff at open houses and you know what I mean? So I think that there's work that can be done, but if we could even find people who are using it and enjoying it and getting them to promote that to other people, whether it's, can you get them to talk at a school PTO meeting or PTA meeting, or can you, share their experiences so that other people who are using it can say, oh, I had no idea, or I totally forgot about that, or whatever it might be. I think sometimes maybe we're going to talk about parents connecting, but that might be an option too, is how can we connect and help our students be successful in getting to and from school and then being successful at school.
Yep. And then I don't know what the beginning of the year looks like next year if you moved and as you're on a different route. So there's the refresh as well as the new parent piece. So work in progress.
Right. We know we can't capture everybody.
So before we move into this last section, I'm going to move us along because it's already 4:30, which I'm sorry blows my mind how fast, maybe not for all of you, but it does. I want to pause here because we get the chance to go through everything with you, the good things that are happening and all of the work that's behind all of this. We monitor a dashboard of what's going on in each department, and there's just a lot that goes into all of this. But we also need to acknowledge the work of all of our staff out in our buildings, because all of this trickles out into that daily practice. With some of the comments that you mentioned is, what does this look and feel like in the classroom? What does this look like for extra work? Or how does this reduce work or confusion? All of that is really important. And so I just want to take the opportunity to thank all of our staff and our building level staff for what they do to implement all of this at the building level. That's where the magic happens. And what's really great is as we're out doing our school visits, Dr. Boyson and Dr. Nold and I have talked about this. You can hear the difference in the conversations. You can see things in classrooms. You don't just think you know, you can see it with the data, and you can see it in practice. And that's really what we want to get to. When we talk about using data, it's magical when you go into a school and you can see that they have it posted and the kids are interacting with where they're improving. And they are celebrating the things that happen when you put those good practices into place consistently. And so that's really exciting. So we have a lot of good things happening. We'll talk about this more as we progress through second semester, as we look at what our recommendations will be if we change any of our language or tweak it a little bit here and there. But we've got some really good work that's happened in that whole cycle of continuous improvement, and we really want to give kudos to the people making it work in our buildings. So with that said, the little different twist that I want you to think about today, and we're not going to have much time to do it, so I'm going to talk with each of you in your one-on-ones with me. Doug will go through just a couple of the slides of the data that we got back, and we're just looking at the parent one. We also asked staff. Both groups said, by and large, they had a really good start to the school year, smooth transition. But I want to just characterize this a little bit as I then ask you the questions. So Doug, you want to look at those, and thank you for doing that.
So surveys, we've put a schedule together where we go out and we schedule either parents or staff or students kind of on a periodic basis, topical, related to the district priorities document. And we're really focused on kind of short, surveys with, instead of more, rated a 9, 10 or whatever, more comments or whatever. So Deanne and I worked on it to brand it. So we call it Sioux Falls School District Views and Voice. So it has sort of a branding when stuff goes out. And this fall, we did a survey, basically a back-to-school survey that says, my child's transition to the new school year went smoothly. That's basically what we asked. And then we asked them for reasons why it worked well and why it didn't. And that was the extent of our survey, rather than have them comb through 20-some questions. Well, you can see here that 95% of our parents either strongly agreed or agreed that their child's transition to the new school year went well. So as Dr. Saban was saying, that's a tribute to everyone out there in the buildings and everyone doing what they are doing, because it's a big lift to get school started up and get especially with kids transitioning to middle schools, high schools, things of that nature, kindergarten. So we were really happy with that. And when you look at themes about things that we did well, that they like, that they want to keep doing, they were happy with the communication that we used, all the processes to push out information to get ready for school. They liked the school calendar, meaning that we eased into the school calendar. So we start with 2 days and we go 4 days. And so they really like that transition. And then they tell us that they really like being in the buildings before school starts, right? Just to familiarize themselves. their children, whatever, with the school, with the staff, and so that's something that came through loud and clear from them. As far as things that they wanted to see more of next year, or to possible areas to improve, continued more opportunities for parent involvement. Coming out of COVID, a lot of that went away, and so how do we get that back? Parents in the buildings really being part of that whole process. Logistics around drop-off, pickup, parking. A lot of those you just see a smattering by school, right? So every school has a little bit of nuance, depending on their drop-off areas. So we got feedback, and we're able to obviously stratify this by building. So each building got their results. So they kind of knew specific to their buildings. Busing, we're going through, obviously our busing and trying to get that up and going for the school year. And so there was, not too much, but certainly themes around busing, buses being on time, things that you normally expect there. One thing we hear loud and clear is the number of communication platforms that we use. They would like that streamlined. They would, we use different things like we have now with our App2G app, which used to be ParentLink, and then we have the LMS systems, and we have, Remind. So, that's a strategic need of our district, is to try to narrow those down. And so as we look to the common LMS system and some other ways to sort of narrow it in, that would, I think, go a long way to help parents with that. And then some comments around things like supply lists being late or whatever, things like that. So doing the survey this way, it helped us focus more on the comments and feedbacks rather than a score, although we were happy with the overall school. Parents were really happy with the way things that went this school year. And so additionally, this year we've done an MTSS survey to teachers, and we've done some survey to students on what their plans are for next year, things that we normally do. And so we keep looking for areas that we want to know specific about, and we'll keep kind of with that process. And then this spring we'll do our climate surveys again with parents and students, and kind of benchmark that against where we were last year.
So, in keeping with that, one of the key points was wanting to be at more school events, wanting to do more things on site. That's been really good. One interesting piece that's come through from our World Cafe themes, and I also have heard this as the city is doing feedback for their 10-year plan with Forward Sioux Falls, is there is a strong theme of not only reconnecting with an organization or with our schools, but the real unique thing was parents wanting to know other parents. And one of the things that they said was having events are great and getting back into schools are great, but intentional connections are even better. And one parent said, it's great to go and have pizza at my child's school. We're really glad those things are starting to happen again. But if I leave not knowing another family, then I'm no more connected than I was. We hear that with neighborhoods, and you have these interesting kind of nuances as communities, as Sioux Falls is growing bigger. Remember last year our statistic that was shocking with 41 countries and 43 states, all of these people coming, people moving between neighborhoods or even apartment buildings or homes. How do we connect you so that not only do you see people, but you connect? And so one of the things that I really want us to think about for next year, and we've asked our building leaders and their teams to think about it as well, is what could we do to really be more intentional about connecting families with other families, so that some of the other parents in your child's classroom. If you're a new kindergarten parent and you may not know other children that your child is playing with at school, outside of school now in the same way they did once upon a time, and knowing that COVID added kind of a different flavor to that disconnect. what could we do? And we don't have to have all the solutions today, but I think that's an area that's really important as we think about just the future health of our community as we grow and as we greet all families at all levels and different programs, scenarios. What does that look like? Comments on that, or ideas, or things that you know have been helpful to you as a parent, or that you have heard from other parents and families that have been valuable?
I've heard in three areas that come top of mind right away. PTOs. Not only are they lacking in parents that want to step forward and be involved with the organization, donations are down, more administration is filling the roles that the PTO president, vice president, treasurer, secretary, and such used to cover. And in each school, it's their own, unique situation with PTO. Student information books. It used to be you'd get your classroom, the name of the parent, where they if the parent wanted to be placed in there, and a telephone number. So if you are organizing a birthday party or a get together, you could easily have your child, with the help of them, look who do you want to invite. Several of the schools, and maybe it's all of them. Maybe this is a district-wide deal. I'm not sure. I can only speak to ours, but we no longer have information books. So it makes getting together outside of the classroom very challenging. Just being asked to volunteer. It used to be prior to COVID, and this is going back before I was involved with the school board, but our PTO made an effort in working with the teachers and getting slips of paper out to the parents and how they wanted to volunteer in the classroom. And the principals got support to those teachers that weren't new or not quite sure how to get parents engaged. The two schools that come top of mind that their social capital is high and we could learn a lot from would be the Spanish immersion, as well as All City. And if you look at those two schools, I would imagine that there's some sort of correlation with parent involvement and student achievement in both of those, particularly All City, most definitely.
I would, my experience with Sonia, for example, they would have kindergarten play dates in the summer and get families together that way before school even started. And I think they even had play dates maybe for the other lower grades. It's been a while, obviously, so I can't remember clearly. I don't know if you didn't.
It was mostly kindergarten, but a lot of times families would bring whoever their siblings were, and so if they had older children that had friends. But that's your kids go play, and then the parents talk, and then you learn about each other, and you see each other on the playground, and you're like, oh, hey, remember me? This is Johnny, or whatever it is, because you were at the park together.
Right.
All City did that.
Yeah. So that's a great way, I think, to get parents engaged at that very early stage. I agree with everything Nan said. Getting parent involvement in PTOs is difficult. And how can we make that, or PTOs and PTAs, whatever the school has. I know we have both throughout the district. So getting that parent involvement is obviously, has been a challenge in getting parents to be, in those president, vice president, treasurer roles.
I think I think you almost have to look at a couple different categories. Are we trying to engage families with families, or are we trying to engage adults with adults, or kids with kids? Because I think that there's different aspects of approaching each of those. I think naturally we become friends with our kids as our kids as friends as family. So that's an easy thing. If you play a sport, if you're in band, if you're in chorus, kind of by default, you know who those people are. But really outside of that, I don't feel like there's a lot of intentionality around how do you get people together. And I can say that I felt that once you left elementary school, it just tanked. Like, once you hit middle school, it's almost like parents were like, yes, take them. you know? And so it's hard to find, you always had co-president, vice president people at PTOs because nobody wanted to own it, but I'll do it if you'll do it with me. You know, it was kind of one of those things. And so I don't know how you maybe start with middle school. And I think there's great things like Jumpstart at all of our middle schools, but again, that's kids and kids. That's not adults. And so as you enter your middle school years that are often very challenging for students, it can be very alienating for parents because you think that maybe your child is the only one that has this concern or this issue because you don't know enough other people to be able to reach out and say, hey, I'm really struggling in this class, or does your student talk about this student who's, you know, bothering them, whatever it might be, but you just don't have the connections because you come from an elementary school that maybe not all, I mean, it's different now, the boundaries are different where they have kind of the schools that are going there, but that wasn't always the case where you didn't come there with all of these people that you knew from elementary school to middle school. So I think that there's different things that could be done, just depending on which category you're kind of trying to cater to, whether it's adults and adults. I know one of the great things about, you know, the Spanish immersion program is when we switched from the Fiesta, which everybody, you know, everyone came together to now doing the Great Gatherings, that's adults only. And it's adults meeting adults, and it's people signing up to say, oh, you're going to host a Nebraska watch party. I like Nebraska. I'm going to come to your house because we automatically have something in common and there's an icebreaker there. Or I like wine. I like, you know, sledding. I like whatever it is. And so parents are choosing to meet with people who they already know have something in common with. They may not know the person, but they think, oh, we have something in common. That's an interest that I have. And so I think that has been a really good networker for that community. And you come to the event and you wear a name tag about, you know, what age your kids are. Some of the younger families seek out the older parent families to say, how did you get through this? Or what did you do in this scenario? Or whatever it is. So it very much is a networking social, but it's adults only. So I mean, I think that's a different perspective of how do you orchestrate something for adults where they can connect and meet people. I just think it's hard. I think adult socialization is really hard. People have work and people have their kids' activities, and so to try to make another opportunity to do that is really hard. And then if you add a financial aspect to that, whether it's going out and paying for something or whether it's paying a babysitter or whatever it might be, I think that gets challenging too. So I think cost would have to be something that was definitely considered to make it more realistic for people to be able to participate.
I think I'll use another example too, and you know, just when we were at Longfellow, which granted smaller school, you know, we would have parent nights once a semester, and you would have you know, an opportunity to meet with your child's, you know, teacher and it was a way for them to engage with the families, but you would also see other families there and you would get to know your child's classmates and maybe some other parents that way. And it usually was, you know, again, you know, especially with those, I guess, you know, especially title schools, you know, providing a meal. It would bring the families in, maybe even bus the families to the event. Obviously, all at cost to the school, but a way to bring families together, provide, you know, educational information or educational tools on how to, you know, how to play some educational games with your kids at night. But it was also a way to bring families together. And, you know, being so far removed from elementary, I don't know if those things are still happening, or maybe they are at some schools, but not all schools. But I thought that was also a great way for bringing families together.
I agree. You know, we live a block from our son's elementary, and my son, who just graduated, we would drive by Robert Frost and get out of cars. He's like, "Is it ice cream social? I'm just gonna drop in and stop in and see it again," and because he has such fond memories of that, and it was a great way. You know, if there's a cost, obviously, but it's giving the parents or somebody to volunteer because it's a lot to burden the staff. Outside their additional work and outside their additional hours to do that, to find the parents or partners within the community, whether it be churches or businesses, to sponsor something like just the ice cream, and then artwork's up on a wall, and that's it. You know, that's it. But it is a way to intentional, and then you can have all the third grade families together in one area of school, and just intentionally do it, make it cost effective, yet still make them want to show up and have that activity. But, another idea I've heard is, I believe one of the private schools in town, they do monthly birthdays. So they'll say everybody who's a student who has a birthday in October, your families and you come to the school and we're celebrating all your birthday, you know, and they have some type of event surrounding that. And it's just a way to kind of get a good group at one time, and it's a random, obviously, placement, but a way for people to still feel engaged and brought in, and, oh, you're at my kid's birthday, I better show up, you know, type of thing, so.
We have a lot, you know, of great events, and those are coming back, and they're ways to get people in. And so one of the things that I'm thinking about is we need to do a really good job of collecting kind of what did we bring back this year and what worked well, and then are we as intentional as possible? I was at one of our middle schools today, and they're having a taste of their school, and that's a new event. And I said, be intentional about how you connect people with other people, but some of them are trying some new things. And I think your point about the layers that we have to look, and they had tried just a couple of new adult-only things. And so how do we collect that and then say, here's an exemplar for everybody to look at because it worked well with. But it's really unique to hear people talk about the need to connect with other people. And if you grew up in a small town like I did, and you were related to most people, or you knew everybody, you know, that we hear that changing even in small towns, that people don't know each other like they once did. Pandemic impacted that. And so we want to be really, really intentional about that. So continue to think about that as you talk to your constituents, as you interact with the families that you are around at your schools. Ask them, do you feel connected to other families? And I think that's a question we're going to continue to ask. And then if not, then how do we continue to foster that? Because that's really important, particularly as we get bigger and bigger. We're going to add another school in another few years. You know, the families that joined together last year in Ben Rifle and in Jefferson, they don't necessarily know each other. And you're right, if you're in an activity, that's one of the best ways to connect families to families. But even so, I'm pretty sure we could all go to a basketball game Friday night and ask a parent, how many people do you know sitting within 10 feet of you? And the answer may be not very many, especially if you're new to that activity or new to our community. So I think we also need to challenge our community members. If you're sitting a row in front of somebody and their knee is in your back for an entire basketball game, you should know who they are by the time you leave, in a nice way, you know, and really connect so that every time you show up to that game week after week after week, by the end of the season, you know most of the people around you. And we have to all be intentional about that. So keep thinking. We're going to go deeper on that, I think, at one of our World Cafes this spring. And I deeply appreciate your time and attention this afternoon. We want to be accountable to our board and to our community for all of the work that just continues to strengthen what we do in our classrooms every single day. We are responsible for the well-being of nearly 25,000 children every day, and we take that responsibility very, very seriously, as well as being good stewards of the time and the resources that we have. And we appreciate your work to support that and to challenge us and to hold us accountable. So thank you. And with that, you can gavel us out, and then we'll tell you what to do next.